December 7, 1941. 6 o'clock hours. The North Pacific is calm. At the combined fleet headquarters in Tokyo, the operational reality is already fixed. Fuel allocations have been calculated. Carrier tasking orders have been issued. Replacement pilots are not planned for. The plan is built on the assumption that there will not be time for attrition. Japan is not choosing war in the abstract. It is responding to a calendar. Since July, American embargoes have reduced Japan's oil reserves to less than 18 months at peacetime consumption. At wartime levels, the number collapses to single digits. No domestic alternative exists. Synthetic fuel programs are years from viability. The merchant fleet is already stretched, moving coal, iron ore, and food across an empire that produces little of what it consumes. Every calculation inside the Imperial Navy is shaped by that arithmetic. The United States Navy, by contrast, is not yet at war. Its Pacific Fleet sits at Pearl Harbor, nearly 4,000 miles from the continental United States, tied to a base that was never designed to sustain prolonged carrier operations. Fuel storage is limited. Dry dock capacity is insufficient. Repair facilities are incomplete. The fleet exists forward because deterrence requires presence, not because logistics are ready. Both sides see constraint. They interpret it differently. For Japan, the constraint is time. For the United States, it is distance. The Japanese solution is decisive battle. It is not emotional. It is structural. Since the Russo-Japanese War, Japanese naval doctrine has assumed that Japan cannot win a prolonged industrial conflict. The solution has always been to shorten the war. Destroy the enemy's fleet early. Force negotiation before economic disparity becomes operational reality. The assumption is not irrational. In 1941, Japan has the world's most experienced carrier aviators. Its pilots have flown combat missions over China for years. Its carrier force is concentrated, well-trained, and doctrinally unified under a single striking arm. No other navy operates 6 fleet carriers as one formation. The United States Navy does not. American carriers are dispersed. Their air groups are less experienced. Their doctrine emphasizes scouting, fleet coordination, and surface engagement, not mass carrier strikes. The battleship is still the institutional center of gravity. The Japanese calculation is that if the Pacific Fleet can be crippled, the United States will require years to rebuild forward naval power. Those years would allow Japan to secure resource areas in Southeast Asia, fortify a defensive perimeter, and negotiate from a position of strength. Every element of that logic depends on compression. Compression of time. Compression of geography. Compression of American response. On the morning of December 7th, the plan works tactically. Battleships are sunk or damaged. Airfields are wrecked. Nearly 2,000 American personnel are killed. The Pacific Fleet is stunned. But the constraint does not lift. It shifts. The American carriers are not present. They are at sea, moving aircraft and supplies. This is not a design feature of American foresight. It is coincidence. But coincidence becomes structure when it survives first contact. Within hours, Japanese planners understand the absence. They do not understand its future cost. The decision not to launch a third strike against Pearl Harbor's fuel tanks, dry docks, and repair facilities is rational in context. Japanese pilots are low on fuel. Anti-aircraft fire is intensifying. Surprise is already expended. Losses cannot be easily replaced. Every trained aviator is a capital asset. The objective has been achieved as defined: neutralize the battleship fleet. The deeper infrastructure remains intact. This is not recognized as decisive because it does not appear decisive. Not yet. The Japanese Navy now commits to the second phase: expansion. In January 1942, Japanese forces advanced simultaneously across the Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, and the Central Pacific. The tempo is extreme. The distances are vast. The logistical tail is thin. But success compounds. Singapore falls in February. Java follows. The Philippines are isolated. Oil fields at Balikpapan and Palembang are seized largely intact. For the first time, Japan controls the resources it has lacked. But control is not supply. Oil must be refined. Tankers must move it. Ports must be defended. Every mile added to the empire increases shipping requirements geometrically. The Japanese merchant fleet is not expanding fast enough to keep pace. In 1942, Japan produces fewer than half the merchant ships the United States launches in a single year. This imbalance is known. It is accepted. The assumption is that the decisive phase will arrive before it matters. That phase is expected somewhere in the Central Pacific. The U.S. Navy responds unevenly. In the early months, American carrier raids strike the Marshall and Gilbert Islands. They do little material damage. They do something else instead. They force the Japanese Navy to disperse. Every raid creates uncertainty. Every uncertainty requires fuel, patrols, and readiness. The Japanese carrier force cannot be everywhere. It is strongest when concentrated. It becomes fragile when spread. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto understands this tension. He is not reckless. He is constrained. He knows Japan cannot match American industrial output. He knows time favors the United States. His solution is escalation before consolidation. The Midway operation is born from that pressure. The plan is complex because simplicity no longer fits the constraints. Japanese forces are now spread from Burma to the Solomon Islands. To concentrate carriers requires moving fuel, escorts, and support across thousands of miles of ocean. Every movement is visible to American signals intelligence. Japan does not know this. By early 1942, American codebreakers are reading portions of Japanese naval traffic. Not everything. Not always. But enough. This is not omniscience. It is partial clarity arriving unevenly. The Japanese assumption is that American morale is brittle, that another decisive blow will break it. The Doolittle raid in April appears to confirm the need for such a blow. Tokyo is bombed, symbolically, not materially. The raid changes nothing operationally. It changes everything psychologically. Midway becomes both shield and bait. The plan commits nearly all available Japanese carriers. It assumes surprise. It assumes American carriers will react predictably. It assumes Japanese pilots will retain qualitative superiority. None of these assumptions are irrational in isolation. Together they remove flexibility. On June 4, 1942, near Midway Atoll, the point of no return has already passed. Japanese carriers are rearming aircraft below decks when American dive bombers arrive overhead. Within minutes, 3 carriers are burning. A 4th follows later in the day. The loss is not just hulls. It is trained air crews, maintenance crews, institutional memory, doctrine embodied in experience. Japan cannot replace these losses. The United States can. But the outcome is not immediately decisive. Japan retains carriers. It retains territory. It retains initiative in parts of the Pacific. What it has lost is margin. From this point forward, every Japanese operation is constrained by losses that cannot be recovered within the war's timeline. The Guadalcanal campaign exposes this reality slowly. Japan can land troops. It cannot sustain them. Night naval battles inflict losses on both sides, but American industry absorbs them. Japanese shipyards do not. Every destroyer sunk reduces convoy capacity. Every tanker lost tightens the fuel calculus. Every experienced pilot killed reduces training quality for replacements. The Japanese Navy begins to choose between equally bad options. Protect shipping or contest sea control. Train new pilots or keep veterans flying until exhaustion. Defend perimeter bases or concentrate forces for counterattack. The United States Navy is not choosing yet. It is building. By 1943, American shipyards are launching fleet carriers faster than Japan can complete light carriers. Escort carriers multiply. Destroyers roll off production lines in months. Submarines deploy in numbers that Japanese anti-submarine warfare cannot counter. The submarine campaign becomes a silent constraint. Japanese shipping losses increase steadily. Not catastrophically at first. Just enough to disrupt schedules. Then enough to reduce stockpiles. Then enough to make fuel rationing permanent. The combined fleet trains less because it cannot afford fuel. Pilots fly fewer hours. Carrier operations become exercises in conservation rather than dominance. By the time of the Philippine Sea in 1944, the imbalance is irreversible. Japan commits its remaining carrier air power in an attempt to halt the American advance toward the Marianas. The result is not a dramatic battle. It is an asymmetrical one. American radar, pilot training, and numbers dominate. Japanese pilots are brave but undertrained. Losses are overwhelming. The battle is later called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The name obscures the process. This outcome was not created in a day. It was created by decisions made under constraint, each one logical at the time, each one narrowing the future. Japan's final naval sorties, Leyte Gulf most notably, are acts of exhaustion, not strategy. Fuel shortages limit maneuver. Command coordination collapses under complexity. Opportunities appear but cannot be exploited because the means no longer exist. The U.S. Navy, by contrast, now operates as an industrial system. Losses are expected. Replacement is assumed. Strategy is built on sustainability, not decision. By 1945, the outcome is no longer in doubt. The Japanese Navy is functionally destroyed. Its remaining ships are immobile due to fuel shortages. Its pilots are gone. Its merchant fleet is shattered. The war ends not because a single decision failed, but because a structure built to compress time encountered an opponent built to extend it. Japan did not lose because it misunderstood war. It lost because it understood its constraints too well, and gambled that they could be outrun. They could not. July 1942. The Solomon Islands. The American landing on Guadalcanal is not conceived as a decisive operation. It is an interruption. A limited move meant to deny Japan an airfield that could threaten the sea lanes between the United States and Australia. Its scale reflects American uncertainty. The U.S. Navy does not yet have numerical dominance. It does not yet trust its carrier doctrine completely. It does not yet know how Japan will respond. What it has for the first time is initiative backed by a growing but still fragile logistical base. Japan responds immediately. The Imperial Navy's problem is not willingness. It is alignment. Its forces are scattered across an empire built faster than it can be integrated. Communication lines are long. Escort forces are thin. Fuel depots are forward but exposed. Every reinforcement to Guadalcanal competes with shipping needed elsewhere. The Tokyo Express, night destroyer runs down the slot, becomes the only viable supply method. Destroyers are fast. They can evade American air power at night. They can deliver troops. They cannot deliver enough food, ammunition, or heavy equipment. Each run consumes fuel at rates Japan cannot sustain. Each loss is permanent. Destroyers are not easily replaced. Shipyard capacity is limited. Skilled labor is finite. Steel is allocated by priority, and the Navy is no longer the only claimant. Japan is fighting a land, air, and sea war simultaneously. Its economy was not designed for this. The United States increasingly is. Guadalcanal stretches Japanese logistics to the point of fracture, but the break is not visible yet. The campaign becomes a sequence of night naval battles and attritional air engagements. Both sides lose ships. Both sides lose aircraft. The difference is not courage or competence. It is replacement. By late 1942, American shipyards are operating around the clock. New Essex-class carriers are launching. Destroyer escorts are entering service faster than training pipelines can fill crews. Aircraft production is accelerating. Pilot training hours are increasing, not decreasing. The Japanese system moves in the opposite direction. Pilot losses at Midway and Guadalcanal force accelerated training programs. Flight hours are cut. Combat experience becomes diluted. Veteran pilots are kept at the front longer because there are not enough instructors to rotate them home. This is a rational short-term decision. It is catastrophic long-term. By early 1943, Japan faces a structural dilemma. To conserve fuel, the combined fleet reduces training sorties. To maintain operational readiness, it needs trained pilots. To train pilots, it needs fuel. To obtain fuel, it needs shipping. To protect shipping, it needs escort vessels and air cover. To provide air cover, it needs trained pilots. The system feeds on itself. The United States does not fully perceive this dynamic yet. But it does not need to. Its strategy does not require perfect understanding of Japanese weakness. It requires persistence. Operation Cartwheel, the Allied advance through the Southwest Pacific and the Solomons, is not a single thrust. It is a sequence of bypasses. Japanese strongholds are isolated rather than assaulted. Garrisons are left to wither, cut off from resupply. This strategy increases pressure without forcing decisive engagements. Each bypass reduces Japanese options. Each isolated base still consumes shipping, still requires fuel, still demands air cover. The Japanese Navy is pulled in multiple directions simultaneously. By 1943, American submarines begin to exert influence beyond tactical encounters. Early in the war, U.S. submarine performance is poor. Torpedoes malfunction. Tactics are inconsistent. Losses are high. This is a delay, not a failure. By mid-1943, torpedo defects are corrected. Commanders gain experience. Patrol coordination improves. The Japanese anti-submarine warfare system does not adapt fast enough. Convoys are under-escorted. Radar is limited. Training is uneven. Prioritization remains focused on fleet actions, not commerce defense. Japanese shipping losses rise steadily. Not dramatically at first. A tanker here. A freighter there. Schedules disrupted. Cargoes delayed. But the effect accumulates. Oil begins to pool in the Dutch East Indies because there are not enough tankers to move it. Refineries operate below capacity. Forward bases receive less fuel. Training allocations are cut again. The Japanese Navy has ships it cannot sail. The Americans begin to notice. By late 1943, the U.S. Navy's operational tempo increases. Carrier task forces strike across the Central Pacific. Airfields are seized. Seabees construct runways in weeks. Logistics hubs move forward in carefully staged increments. This is not improvisation. It is industrial warfare applied to geography. Distances that once favored Japan now favor the United States. Each captured island becomes a stepping stone for supply, repair, and air cover. The Pacific shrinks for one side and expands for the other. The Japanese response is constrained by choice already made. They cannot abandon the perimeter without conceding political and strategic collapse. They cannot defend it everywhere. They cannot concentrate without exposing supply lines. They cannot replace losses fast enough to risk decisive engagement. So they wait. By 1944, the decisive battle Japan has sought since 1941 finally appears possible. The American advance toward the Marianas threatens Japan's inner defensive zone. The islands are within bomber range of the home islands. If lost, the war's strategic balance shifts permanently. Japan commits its remaining carrier forces. The Battle of the Philippine Sea is not a gamble born of optimism. It is a necessity born of constraint. The Japanese plan assumes that land-based air power from the Marianas, combined with carrier aviation, can offset American numerical superiority. It assumes pilots can still perform complex long-range strikes. It assumes coordination under combat conditions. These assumptions are outdated but not obviously false until tested. On June 19, 1944, they are tested. American radar detects incoming Japanese strikes at long range. Fighters intercept at altitude. Combat air patrols are continuous. Japanese aircraft are shot down before reaching the fleet. Losses are devastating. But the deeper loss is not the aircraft. It is the last generation of Japanese naval aviators. Carrier decks remain afloat. All survive. The air groups do not. From this point forward, the Japanese carrier force exists largely as empty tonnage. It can no longer project power. It can only absorb it. The United States Navy now faces choices Japan no longer has. It can afford to wait. It can afford to bypass. It can afford to accept losses in exchange for momentum. At Leyte Gulf later that year, Japan attempts one final complex operation to disrupt the American landings in the Philippines. The plan involves multiple task forces approaching from different directions, hoping to draw American carriers away. Fuel shortages limit speed. Communication failures cause confusion. Opportunities appear but cannot be exploited. Commanders hesitate not because they lack resolve, but because they lack information and support. The battle ends with catastrophic Japanese losses. Not because the plan was irrational. Because it was late. By 1945, the Imperial Japanese Navy no longer functions as a system. It has ships without fuel, pilots without aircraft, bases without supply, and plans without means. The United States Navy, meanwhile, has transformed into a self-sustaining machine. Its logistics fleet rivals its combat fleet in importance. Repair ships operate forward. Training pipelines replace losses predictably. Strategy assumes duration. The war concludes not with a final naval battle, but with the quiet absence of Japanese sea power. There is no moment when defeat is formally acknowledged at sea. It simply becomes impossible to act. Spring 1945. The Inland Sea. What remains of the Imperial Japanese Navy is no longer a fleet in the operational sense. It is a collection of hulls tied to fuel calculations that no longer add up. Battleships remain. Cruisers remain. Even a handful of destroyers remain. What does not remain is freedom of movement. Fuel stocks are allocated in days, not months. Training sorties have ceased. Communications are fragmented. Air cover is intermittent or non-existent. American carrier aircraft roamed the approaches to the home islands with little resistance. The Japanese Navy's final major sortie, Operation Tengo, is planned under conditions that would have been unthinkable 4 years earlier. Yamato sails with just enough fuel to reach Okinawa. Not enough to return. The mission is not intended to alter the war's outcome. It is intended to impose cost. The distinction matters. Yamato is sunk by American carrier aircraft before reaching its objective. The loss is total. The operational effect is negligible. But the event is revealing. It demonstrates that the Japanese Navy has reached a condition where action no longer implies choice. It implies obligation. Decisions are made not because they can succeed, but because not acting would acknowledge collapse. This condition did not arise suddenly. It emerged from a sequence of decisions taken under constraint, each one logical within its moment, each one narrowing the future. The original strategic assumption, that Japan could not win a prolonged industrial war, was correct. The conclusion drawn from it, that victory must be achieved quickly through decisive naval battle, was also reasonable. What followed was a structure built entirely around compression. Shortening timelines. Forcing outcomes. Accepting risk to avoid delay. This structure worked only as long as the war remained short. Once it did not, every advantage became a liability. Carrier doctrine that prioritized elite pilots over mass training became brittle under attrition. A merchant fleet sized for regional trade collapsed under transoceanic demands. A fuel system designed for concentrated fleet actions failed when dispersion became unavoidable. Japan's Navy was optimized for a single, decisive confrontation. The United States Navy was forced slowly and unevenly into a war of duration. Once that transition occurred, the outcome became structural. American naval power did not defeat Japan primarily by outmaneuvering it tactically, though tactical victories mattered. It defeated Japan by converting time into force. Every month added ships. Every ship added options. Every option reduced risk. American industrial output did not merely replace losses. It absorbed uncertainty. It allowed failure without collapse. It allowed learning without exhaustion. The Japanese system could not do this. Its losses were cumulative. Its errors were permanent. Its successes required repetition it could not sustain. By late 1944, Japan was not losing because it made worse decisions. It was losing because it no longer had decisions that mattered. The U.S. Navy, by contrast, reached a condition where no single engagement could reverse its position. Defeat required a collapse of the entire system. Victory required only persistence. This difference shaped the post-war world. American naval dominance after 1945 was not accidental. It was the result of a war fought as an industrial process rather than a contest of decisive moments. Bases across the Pacific became permanent. Logistics became doctrine. Carrier aviation became scalable, not elite. Japan's post-war maritime posture reflected the lesson from the opposite direction. Constraints were accepted. Force was bounded. Strategy became defensive by design. The war at sea in the Pacific was not decided by one battle, one leader, or one error. It was decided by how each side responded to what it could not change. Japan attempted to outrun its limits. The United States learned how to live inside its own, and expand them. That difference, more than any single engagement, determined the outcome.